All right, well, let's get started. We only have 50 minutes here. Is there a weird echo for anyone, or is it's just me? Okay. So my name's John O'Luck. I'm a group program manager on the Power BI team. I'm just going to call this out. I usually like longer stages because I pace, so I may fall off here at any point in time. Like I said, I'm a group program manager with the Power BI team, and for the next 50 minutes, we'll talk through some of the security aspects of Power BI. We'll walk through sort of how to think about security, what your options are, what you can do. We'll talk a little bit about what we do with your data when it's in our service. And a topic I've actually been asked a couple times about already, what about multi-factor authentication? You know, all my end users sort of security, we'll touch on that too. Just a level set for me here, how many folks are IT administrators that are thinking about security? Okay, a decent chunk. How many folks are already using Office 365 or another Microsoft product? That I like, okay. So we'll touch on sort of, some of the elements you may already know about, but I also want to make sure we cover it all. So just bear with me as we move through. So let's get started then. Your world. This box is your Power BI content, okay? You've got reports, you've got dashboards, you've got your data. It's in our data centers. We promise you it's secure from our point of view. The reality is this isn't a closed box. It isn't something with no ingress or egress, right? You have your users out there in the world. These users use devices, and those devices need to get at their data. And that's the first element we'll talk about. How do you secure your users as they come in to get to your corporate information? Also, information comes from more than just a database inside Microsoft, right? We've talked about content packs at a variety of sessions throughout the last 2 days. Pull data from Salesforce, other Azure services like HD Insight, right? An on-premises analysis server. There's a variety of places where you can get information, and so those too must be secure at all times. On-premises, I mentioned analysis services as an example, and all of this serves to keep this bad guy from getting into your data, right? I think that might be a He-Man character. I'm just old enough to remember He-Man, and he kind of looks like that. So that's the person we're going to keep out at the end of all of this. So as I mentioned, user identity, right? What can you do to actually ensure that users are who they say they are? Data security we'll talk about, right? How is data stored at rest? How to collaborate within your organization. This is where things start to get a little scary, right? People sending around snapshots of screens, emails, all of that. So we'll touch a bit on sort of how to think about securing information and sharing information within your organization. The scarier yet is collaborating outside of your organization, right? And finally, how we handle and retrieve information from places outside of our box, right? How we grab information from on-premises and other cloud sources. So those are kind of the 5 pieces we'll talk through. My animations are still in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those are the 5 things I promise we'll cover. And at the end of it, I'll do a quick demo of some of just the main points in there to show you, how this looks to your end user and what's possible. So we'll start with user identity. Microsoft Power BI is a part of the Microsoft Cloud. That means it's built on Azure Active Directory. How many folks here are actually like sort of the Azure AD administrator, the directory administrator within the IT admin department? Okay, so you're really familiar then with some of the concepts in Azure AD Federation and all of those, right? For sort of just the broader audience, Azure AD is really the way that you can secure all your information in Office 365 using one set of users groups, right? I am jluck at Microsoft.com, but I also belong to a group that's called Power BI. And each of those levels of sort of those types of principles can be used to secure access to information. The key thing here, and I won't go into too much depth, is make sure you choose the right identity infrastructure. In a past life, I worked for Azure AD, and I did a whole 90-minute session on this. I can give you that spiel if you ever want it. But at the highest of levels, it's how do you want to manage the users that get access to your data, right? There is a directory synchronization functionality as part of AAD Connect. That way, if you're already managing your on-prem ADs, right, as you hire new employees in, you're putting them into your HR system that provisions them into AD and the right cost centers and security groups. AAD Connect lets you leverage that, right? Well, a single administrative place, and then both on-premises and cloud get the same set of principles, and your directories are consistent. Something that's interesting here is admins can do a bunch of stuff with Azure AD, but there's a particular set of functionality and ways that users can get to Power BI. For those folks that are, oh, actually I should ask as well, how many people, orgs are already using Power BI? Okay, so if you're not, as a company, already using Power BI, you're not fully managing that Power BI experience, it is possible for individual users in your company to go to powerbi.com, click sign in, enter their corporate email, and get going. Right, that's kind of the individual path to get in. Of course, if your whole IT department is managing that experience, then they've already got licenses and the administrative process is there. But there is a way for individuals to do what we call self-sign up for Power BI. As an administrator, and I don't know why you would ever want to do this, everyone wants to use Power BI, right? You can actually prevent that self-sign up. There's an option, there's actually an entire article on the web about how you have that administrative control to prevent this kind of, like the individual, the IW as we call them, right, from starting up Power BI. Something to note, that behavior, this ability for I as an individual within the company to just start using Power BI, that actually exists for a couple other features across Office 365 as well. So the control that you have, it's I think it's a true-false Boolean on one particular PowerShell commandlet, controls that behavior for all of their interaction with Office 365 and Power BI. So there's something to think about there. It's not a very granular switch. It's allow my users to self-sign up. And then it's anything that has self-sign up, they're now impacted for. As I mentioned, if you're a fully IT-managed organization, you're provisioning licenses for your users, all is good there, right? You're using your AAD appropriately, and then users get access. So, user access control now. All of us have corporate accounts, right? We have corporate identities. Prior to, I'd say, even 3 or 4 years ago, and I know this because I used to do this, MFA wasn't really a thing. Usernames and passwords were it, right? The problem with passwords are, it's something you know. That's all it is. It's a string. In some cases, it can be like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or if anyone watches Spaceballs, that's from there. Or you can make it more complex. Require symbols, right? Require 47 characters. Make them change it every 2 weeks. We did all these things to make passwords more secure. What we did was we pushed passwords to sticky notes. We pushed passwords to OneNote notebooks so that I would not have to remember the thing I just changed last week in 7 different places, right? That's the problem with what you know. You can replicate it easily. Multi-factor authentication is a way for us to require the user to prove they are who they say they are with something they have, right? A long while back, there used to be those RSA tokens where the numbers refreshed every 10 seconds. With the democratization of IT and everyone bringing, like I have my own iPhone, that wasn't feasible. And so what we've done is we've provided a suite of multi-factor auth options as part of Azure AD and the broader Microsoft ecosystem that allow you to do things like answer a phone call, right? Get the code via, I don't know what I just did. Oh, there we go. That wasn't me. And answer a phone call, right? Press 1, enter a PIN. It requires the user to have something because it's hard to duplicate a phone. I know that sometimes we think it's possible, but it actually is pretty hard to go and get in the way of, I have this device, right? I'm answering that phone call, I have an app. And so that's what MFA is really doing. Going back to sort of what you choose in terms of your identity infrastructure, you could be a company that's wholly in our cloud. You don't have to have an on-premises AD. With Azure Active Directory, you can enable phone-based multi-factor authentication for all your users. It's in the admin portal. You go there, you flick the require multi-factor authentication. The next time the user signs in, they're going to get this thing that says, your admin requires you to configure your MFA. And then you choose text message, phone call, those types of options in there. So right out of the box with the Microsoft Cloud, you can have MFA for your users. If you do have an on-premises environment and you're federated using perhaps ADFS or any of the third-party IDPs we support, then the options are endless, right? It's as long as your on-premises IDP has performed the MFA and issues the MFA completed claim in the token, I can't remember anymore, you're good to go. So that's where you get extensibility. One of the most interesting and extreme examples of MFA I saw, I think it was with a mining company, your geolocation plus your ability to answer your phone was the way they did that. So that way they made sure you were within sort of their zones of where that project was. Right, and so those are some, again, when you're in the on-prem world, full flexibility, whatever the heck you want to do. So that's sort of securing users, right? Making them prove they are who they say they are. There's a second element to that. That's just me. That's just a person, right? I could be on a library machine. I used to be in Office. The disastrous scenario that actually happened was someone was in the hotel lobby at the business center, like we have just down here. They logged into the Windows machine. They set up their Outlook. And they started synchronizing mail. Their corporate email was now on a hotel lobby machine. And because the hotel policy was, I think they wiped it once a day or whatever it was, that data was there for a very long time, right? Well, this is where, and this is more prevalent, obviously, with mobile devices, right? Now everyone has their phone, their iPad, all these kinds of things. This is where mobile device management, and I'll talk about conditional access in a second, come in. Mobile device management and app management lets you kind of get more granular and think about the device, right? Think about the application. Make sure that you're securing sort of the most granular thing possible. And so we support mobile device and mobile application management with Intune. Some of the things that you can do require a PIN, right? So it doesn't matter what the device is. Every time I launch that particular application, I have to enter my PIN. So if it's a shared iPad, right, I can't get to my corporate data on that application until I get into the app, and that's what's gated by the PIN. So it gives you more security. This person was who they said they were, and I can get into the application. In terms of configuring Intune, there's a portal. There's a portal for that. Inside the portal, you'll specify what the application is you want to control. In our case, it's the Power BI mobile app, right? You grab the URL from the Play Store or the App Store, you put that into Intune, and then you set the policies. There's a whole bunch of them, and actually, if you grab this, it's right there at the bottom. There's a link to sort of everything you can do within Intune. But the most common ones are secure this with the app with a PIN, right? Again, make them do one more sort of quick proof, just 4 digits, to get into that application, in case, like me, they leave their iPads everywhere, leave their computer unlocked by accident. I almost did that upstairs, and it's horrible. I should not do that. And that's where some of these things will help you more. So that's for mobile devices. We are literally, as we speak, validating conditional access for desktop and web access. So for me to use the desktop application or for me to go to powerbi.com and get in, we're working to support sort of device authentication, right? Is this device enrolled? Is this a device that we know? Because that now takes the hotel lobby problem away. The hotel lobby machine is not a corporate device. It's not registered with Microsoft, Contoso, fill in your name there. So therefore, don't let them get access. And so again, it helps you to increase the assurance that it's okay for this user on this device to take that action. And so we're working on that. It's coming soon. We do, as we said, I think, many times through the last 2 days, we release weekly, right? Our service releases weekly, our desktop releases monthly. So just keep an eye on our blog. We'll have more details on there in terms of when it'll be available. But I was literally on a call this morning at 7 with one of our engineers trying to make sure that all got deployed so we could finish testing. So it's very near term. That's user security, user identity, how you make them prove they are who they say they are. We'll move over now and talk about data security, right? This is I've got a ton of data. Power BI is about visualizing and providing insights, right? Driving action on top of information that your company has. So it's really important that information is safe. So I'd like to propose we think of this in 2 parts. The first one is, how do we deal with your data, right? The word query implies I'm getting somehow, I'm pulling something, or you're pushing, right? We have cached data sets. What do we do with that data? Where is it stored? How is it stored? Second part of data security goes back to the user again, because without users, none of us would be here. And that's how your users' access to data is controlled. And so we'll talk about both of those, starting first with how Power BI handles data. So at the highest of levels, you can think of this as being 2 parts. Data is in process, it's in transit, it's being used, it's in memory somewhere. Data is at rest, right? We do want to provide the lowest latency experience for users possible. We want things to be as snappy as possible. We want them to get to their stuff right away. And so we do, for a variety of purposes, cache data. Data is at rest. We'll talk about that in a little too much detail in the next slide. First of all, when data is in transit between our service and your data source, it's always encrypted. There is no way we would ever send your data over plain text. That would just be bad. So it's always encrypted via HTTPS. And depending on where that data lives and the way in which you're interacting with that, for example, we have that direct query protocol, right, which goes and retrieves it effectively just in time. We may store or may not store the information in our service. And I apologize, I hate using tables in slide decks, but this is a 300-level session, so I figured you guys want one thing to take a picture of, and this should be it, right? So data at rest, what do? On the left-hand side column are the 4 sort of data source data interaction models that we have. On the columns across, we have the metadata of that particular set, what we do with the credentials, if at all, and the data itself. So I'll kind of just read across each row. For analysis services on premises, we don't store metadata. So there's nothing there in that column. We're happy, smiley face. Credentials, we also don't store. We'll talk a little bit more about why. That has to do with the security mechanism, RLS and such. So we don't store that either. And for data, we actually pull it as needed. So there's no data stored either. So that's the simplest of the rows. Then we get to the more complex. Direct query. I alluded to this earlier. This is our ability to pull data sort of just in time, right? It's a direct query against your data. We do have some metadata that we store about this data, and so we put that in an Azure Blob storage account. It is encrypted at rest. Credentials. So we need to know how to connect to that data source, and so that's part of the connection string that we store. It's actually stored as metadata, again, an Azure Blob storage account that we own, encrypted at rest. And then because it's just in time, there is no data that we store, right? So there's no data being stored in our service. Pushed data or cached data, you sort of hear different pieces in here. This is your ability to just push into our service the information you want us to have, right? So it is literally a push. We don't know much more beyond what you've given us. So in this case, we store the information in Azure Blob Storage. I say not encrypted. That looks suspicious. I will double check. But it is stored in Azure Blob Storage. There are no credentials in this case to save because, again, you gave us the information. You pushed it, right? We're not connecting back to a data source. And then the data as well is stored in Azure Blob Storage. This blob storage is not something that just willy-nilly can be accessed, by the way. I should have say that, right? It's owned by our service. It's our blob storage account. And then ETL. So we support a couple data sources where we use ETL for interaction. In that case, the metadata is again stored in Azure Blob Storage, and then it's not encrypted. For the different services we can connect to, such as Salesforce and OneDrive, we need the refresh token. That's how we do authentication with those services, right? And what's happening is the refresh token is what's presented to the target service where your data is stored, and that's how we get access. So we do store those tokens. We have to for that interactive request. It's encrypted in our Azure SQL database, again, database owned by us. For those that are refresh data sets, we store the information again in that SQL database owned by us, and that again is encrypted. And then finally, for a non-refresh data set, there's no creds stored. And the data that results from an ETL pull is going to be in our SQL blob storage in a non-encrypted format. The key thing, and those are the two notes at the bottom there, the creds we actually use to get to the SQL Azure database is stored somewhere separately in our service, so wholly owned by us, right? We've separated the two. That way it's harder to compromise. That's a best practice, absolutely. It's 1 key per our service. So this is a question I actually get a lot. It's not a key per tenant. You can't give us, you can't bring your own key and do all of that. It's an ask we get a lot. At this point in time, it's one for our service, and we handle all of that. And again, the access keys for Azure Blob Storage we own, encrypted, stored somewhere else in the Power BI service. Okay, data security, user data access. How do we control what information the users can see? Well, first of all, it really depends on the data source and what it supports. There's 2 levels, or 2 types of data sources. The first ones are RLS enabled. The second is not. At the highest level, what RLS enabled allows us to do is, as part of the data retrieval process, have that be filtered down to the user principal or the group or whatever the semantic is that user belongs to give them that access. Meaning the data presented depends on the person. In the case of non-RLS enabled, that just simply means we don't have that ability to pass the information down about the user principal. So what you actually end up getting back depends on the credentials that are stored for that data source, right? You're gaining access. That credential is what dictates what comes back. So there's 2 models in there. And we'll talk about each literally right now. For RLS, a SQL analysis services is an example of this, right? It knows how to compute security and permissions based off of a user principal. It supports both role and ultimately dynamic and row filters if you've decided to go there. The way this works with our service is, this kind of goes way back to the first or second slide. You've done something to set up your company within Power BI, within Azure AD, right? When you populate and create those users, there's a property called the user principal name. It's actually, it's an artifact of the old AD world. That was kind of it's UPN, if you're familiar with that. That's the unique name that we use for signing in. I am jluck@microsoft.com or sally@contoso.com, right? It's something at something, RFC 822. What Power BI does is we emit that username as part of our request to your on-prem analysis server, and a translation will happen locally in your on-premises environment against AD to figure out who that user is so that analysis services will then apply the correct scoping, filtering, permission set, and give back the right information. So there's kind of we send the information down, a translation happens against AD, magic happens on premises, and again, the data that's returned for that particular request is specific to that user. Julie's somewhere in the back, I know this. Julie, can you put your hand up? Yay, Julie. So RLS is now going to be supported in PowerBI.com, so it won't just be analysis services anymore. We mentioned this yesterday, I think, in the keynote. We're entering, keep me honest, Julie, preview next week, right? Preview next week. There's going to be information on the blog. I don't want to steal too much thunder from that, but hey, RLS for more than just analysis services. That's the gist of this. I know we get a lot of asks, and so what will happen is it will be configurable for cache data sets as well as direct query now, which is a significant increase in scope. And we'll start with DAX support. So you'll be able to see that in the UI. You'll be able to throw a DAX query filter in there. And we will add sort of UX-based definition over time. But at the end of the day, the people that know RLS are probably going to be relatively OK with DAX-style syntax. So that's why we started there, validate, move forward. And again, preview starts next week. Watch for the blog. That'll have all the good and gory details about how to do that. So that's a bit on data security. Now, this is the part where on calls, people start to get antsy. It's the sharing information across companies, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. When you think about collaboration, what matters the most is the scope of that collaboration, right? Again, there's the scary guy, I think, from He-Man, and our user. We want to keep the scary man out. So the smallest scope of control is me, the individual, right? I create stuff. It's mine. It's a single unit entity. The next step up are groups. These are collections of users, right? My department, or some leadership team, super secret, secure, security group. Any type of grouping of users that you've decided makes semantic sense for your business. Finally, at the highest level, you now have your organization, right? And I realize this animation order is wrong here. You have your organization, which is the entirety of your company. When we talk about organizations all throughout Power BI, organization, we're mapping that to your Azure AD tenancy, right? That is the scope and boundary for what an organization is. It's a collection of users and security groups and all that, but that's really when we talk about within org, across org packs, it's my AAD tenant. That's my scope. And the key thing here is just think about what the scope should be when you want to manage that access. And we'll talk about what that actually means, but that's what collaboration security is all about, right? Is what is the right scoping of this? How do I control that? What are the right group memberships? So the ways to control collaboration. We'll talk a bit about the Power BI workspace concept, right? Power BI workspaces are ultimately powered by, I know, Office 365 groups, once upon a time called universal groups. We couldn't possibly have a Microsoft tech that didn't have 4 names for it. Sharing between people within my organization is another one, right? And then finally, we'll actually touch on organizational content packs, right? This is, again, another way to provide information across the company for different users in a contained format. All right, Power BI workspaces. So what, at the end of the day, we think this really helps with is it gives you an intentional way to manage access to sensitive Power BI content. Think of this from the I'm going to create a workspace point of view, right? The picture here is actually the UI. You get to specify who's going to be part of that group that is the thing behind the workspace. This gives you the opportunity to say, this is a private scope, meaning only the named people can have access to this, or it can have a public scope. Go ahead, let anyone. So this is a very natural mapping to the top-level container of a workspace. Obviously, this is where you want to make a choice now, right? Who are the people that should be included here? That's that first level of decision on your part. What is the right scope of that membership? One quick note, you need to have a Power BI professional license to create a workspace because you need to have the license to create a group. So there's a limitation there on who can create workspaces and populate the underlying group. So that's the first sort of construct to think about using is the Power BI workspace, because you can sort of use named users as a way to control that scope. Collaboration by sharing. So this is how you can increase the scope of who can see content, right? I went and created a report. Now I want Julie to see it, and I want Shai. I saw Shai walk in somewhere to see it. I can share. And so things like dashboards, that's exactly what you do. You go and you click share, and I'll show you this in our walkthrough at the end of this all, where you say share, you name the individuals or groups, and off it goes. The key thing here to remember is the recipients of that dashboard sees the data that I see. In fact, there's a whole bar there that says when you actually do the sharing, it's recipients will have access to the same data, reports and workbooks as you have in this dashboard. And so that's just something to think about there. But again, because this is within your organization, it's probably okay. And as I mentioned before, you can share content to users and groups. That's just the principles that are allowed. A quick question there. Unfortunately, right now, you can't use or nest groups within groups, and so that's why it's named users. It is one of the top requests we have into the Azure AD Groups team to allow this type of nesting, because this goes back to the thing I was saying before. You've already curated your directory, right, and those should be there, and so that's one of the top asks we have into the group that owns groups to enable that type of nesting. That's a great question, yeah. So there is, if you kind of think of, sorry, I'm hand waving here, but the question was, if I don't have Office 365, do I still get groups? And if I do, does this mean I get more? And the answer is yeah. Basically, there's the directory where these things exist, the users, the groups, and such, right? And then whatever services you have, you may only have Exchange, you may have none of the above and just Power BI. They will then leverage those groups in the way that makes sense for them, right? So if you don't have the other parts, some of the collaboration features may not light up, but the core directory itself still supports that concept. Okay, content packs in your organization, or organizational content packs. So this is a great way to package up a couple of different pieces of content, reports, dashboards, whatnot, and then share that with others in your organization, right? In the previous thing, share was kind of a point, this dashboard, please there. Content packs, you can imagine, I'll show you actually, some examples of this. This is how you can self-contain a set of reports that are interesting, a data set, whatnot, and provide that to different folks in the organization in a controlled way. The data is actually stored in the content pack, and I'll put an asterisk behind there because I have a note at the bottom, but the data is in the pack itself, and it's read-only. So when I see this when I see the content pack, I open it up, I'll view whatever data is there, and for the most part, that is what you, who created the content pack, put in there. Now, note at the very bottom, if the data for the content pack is coming from analysis services, this is where all that RLS stuff kind of factors back in, right? It'll execute the right query, provide the right information, and so there is a scoping element that can happen if AS is your source. And so the really small text in the middle is just an example. If Sally created the content pack and shares it with Bob and Tom see everything Sally sees. So it's just that's how content packs work. Kind of going back to the, okay, well, who can you share with, right? Content packs can be shared to your organization, so the entirety of it. Again, the tenant boundary is the thing that dictates what you can then share with. Individual groups, that could be either a security group or an Office 365/Power BI group, or individual names users. And you need to have a Power BI Pro license in order to consume and use organizational content packs. So what I'm going to do real quick is actually flip over and do a demo. Do you mind flipping it to the laptop, please? My laptop has the Power BI desktop app on it. What we will show you is how to sign in with MFA, workspaces and groups. So we'll do a quick just click through of that, how dashboards and sharings can work, and then the org content packs will work. Should I? Oh, weird. Okay. Apparently if I click duplicate again. So what I'll do first, actually, is let me sign into powerbi.com, show you that MFA. Let's do this. All right, so go to the powerbi.com website, and I apologize, I realized the screen is squished. In this case, I'm going to sign in. I'm going to sign in with my test tenancy. Hopefully people upstairs are not using the same user I'm using right now. This user is an administrator in the tenant, been configured for MFA. In about 3 seconds, it's going to buzz on my phone. There it went. I'm going to click on the MFA prompt. Come on. All right, there we are. And signal sent back, MFA complete. So that was the MFA against an Azure AD user. This particular example I used is an Azure AD user straight up. It's not someone synchronized from on-premises. So again, that's right out of the box with Azure AD. You get that functionality. All right, so in this example, I'm going to go ahead and create that workspace. We were talking about workspaces, specifying who goes into that. So let me go ahead and create a new workspace. And this is that group, right? This is the set of users that are attached to the workspace. So I can scope this. This is my test group from OnStage. The privacy, and of course that name exists. The privacy is private, right? Only folks inside the group should access my workspace because I want to put sensitive data in here. I'm going to let anyone edit that. So there's me. Surprise, surprise. Bet you didn't know my full name was Jonathan. There's also a couple test users I'm going to use, which is Data Summit, test user 1. There we are. All right. So I've specified 2 users. These are the only people that get to see this. I'm going to go ahead and create that group, create the workspace. All right. This is now the brand new workspace. What I want to do also is just really quickly show, this goes back to the content packs that we specified before. You can see there is a content pack library that my organization has. So if anyone has previously gone and created one, I'll actually create one in a second to show a little bit of that and how that works. There's also content packs that connect to external SaaS services, right? We've talked about this in a couple different forums, but you can see, sorry, I'm trying to scroll here. These are all different data sources out of the box. You click. In some cases, like Bing, there's no authentication. You're just going to literally query Bing for data. It'll come back in, show you information the right way. In other cases, you may want to pull from Salesforce or Acumatica, in which case it's an authenticated pull. Right? Again, this goes back to the what is the right level of security for that. So actually, I'm going to go backwards here and flip over to the Power BI desktop application. So in my other job in life, my team owns, and Shai here as well, he's our group engineering manager, we own the publish to web functionality, the ability to publish your reports on your website, your public-facing website, so that all of your customers can see. This demo here is actually the one that we use for publish to web. So I've gone and done it, I don't have the time, but I've gone and done a ton of great work, right? I've created this report that shows why people are calling 311 in New York. It's beautiful, it's lovely. Because we are city planners for New York, I now need to sort of share this with everyone out there, right? And so because this is the desktop application, I need to put it into the service. I want to make it available to everyone. And I just realized I'm signed in with my corporate account, so just give me 1 second. I'll show you the MFA again. Sign in. Yes, sign in. JLike demo. If anyone has been to Ignites and all that, you've probably seen this account a couple times. All right, MFA again, verify, signed in. So I'm going to hit the publish button, which will take what's effectively a local piece of content, right, a report with visuals, and we'll put that up into the Power BI service so I can then act on that, share that with everyone. Oh. Sorry, 1 second here. This is so useful, I've already done it. Give me 1 second. No. I've just given you a preview of what we're going to do. All right, there we go. So I'm pushing all of the report information and such up into the Power BI service. And this will quickly come back and say, all done. All right, so coming back up to the service, you can now where did it publish it to? Sorry, folks. Okay, it published it somewhere, then I don't know where. Okay, well, that didn't quite go as expected. Let's do this. Let's pull in a sample content pack and kind of go from there real quick. Let's do IT spend sample. And so this does the equivalent of what I was trying to do, which is publish the information report up into the web. So what we'll do next is we'll show you real quick how to share dashboards, right? So we talked about that's that unit of sharing. I can send that out to other individuals. So if I go up to here, I can click share. And so as I mentioned before, this is where you can send invitations to other folks within your organization, right? And so in this particular case, I want to share with my data summit. There we are, the same user I had put into my workspace earlier. There's that warning, right? When I share certain information, people are going to see what I see. And there's an option in here which I want to call out, right? This is the allow recipients to share your dashboard. So I send to someone, can they go and send this out? Again, unit of control, allowing or disallowing sort of the additional propagation of your content to others. So in this case, I'll click share. That sends that out. And the next thing I'll do once this finishes up in here is I want to show you the organizational content pack concept real quick and how that kind of flows. I mentioned you can scope that to the entirety of your organization or individuals. So the people upstairs who are using that test account will now actually have gotten an invitation saying, hey, something has been shared with you. So another way to share this information, like I said, creating an organizational content pack. You package up all of the elements that are interesting, and you can put that and share that with other folks in your team. So here, what we do is we say, create a content pack. And this is that first option you have. I can specify for the entirety of my company, remember that AAD tenant, or for individual groups. I have been cheeky and created a don't share with this group. And this is the test content pack for a demo that will work. You go and you upload an image. And this is so amazing, so we'll use the little monkey. And then you can choose what's included in that content pack. In this case, just because it's a brand new space, I only have a particular dashboard. Come on, mouse. Because that dashboard uses reports and data sets, it pulls the rest along, right? So what I've basically done here is I've decided two things. Who am I going to share this information with within my company? And also, what is the information? What is actually being shared with them? Publish that. Oh, be sure to enter a description. This is the most useful content pack in our org. And hit publish. So what this is doing is it's packaging it up as appropriate and putting it into the organizational content pack gallery. I don't want to switch over and do another login and make you sit through it. But if you flip over and you're a different user, how you would get that is, again, right here. I come to my get data. My organization's I'm sorry, you can't see the mouse here. My organization content pack, get. Because I'm not the user that I shared it with. That's why. Sorry. If I share it to myself, where are you? Or let's just go my entire organization. Let's change that up, the scope in there. All right, and then once it updates, we'll go to get data, and we will see this organizational content pack. These demos always take longer when you're actually on stage, right? Now that I made fun of it, it's just not going to work for me at all. OK, there we go, all done. So if I go to get data, content pack library, my organization, that's that content pack, right? As you could see, because I wasn't in the scope of that sharing before, it didn't show up. Now I'm actually in here. I can view, and then I can connect it. It's kind of a no-op because I already have the actual source content in there. But that's how org content packs work. So let's just, could you switch back, sorry, to the presentation? I want to just run through a couple more things, which is collaborating outside of your company, right? That's one of the scarier ones, how your corporate information makes its way out, and also how some of the data security goes. So collaborating outside of your company, and I'm now talking faster because we have about 15 minutes left. You can share content that your company owns with folks outside of your organization. Again, the AAD tenant is the organizational boundary that we're talking about. The recipient of that sharing does have to sign into Power BI, right? If they don't have a Power BI account, they can go ahead and create one. This kind of goes back a little bit earlier when I was talking about you as an administrator have already set up your company for Power BI, or you have not. So depending on what's happened there, the recipient of the sharing has to open that. Key thing here, external sharing can be turned off by the tenant administrator. right? So that's kind of a really high-level switch. You can go and flip that off, in which case you're now sort of securing that information, keeping it within that the box, so to speak, at the very beginning. Question? In this case, I believe you don't need a pro account, unless, and actually Larissa and Julie can keep me honest, the question was, does the recipient of an external sharing request need to have a pro account? Only if the content that they got shared needs the pro license, right? Yeah, so only if the content requires that. Yeah. So the question, I think, was, when you're sharing with someone externally who doesn't have a pro, is that information public? Like, okay, that's an interesting point. So I think there's a couple different things just to unpack in there. The first one is when I share with a named user, for example, user@othercompany.com, that access is scoped to that user, right? So there's an element in there of, so user2@company.com shouldn't be able to get to that information in the general sharing case. There are scenarios like publish to web, where that does truly actually make it anonymous and available on the internet then, right? And so in that case, anyone that has the URL can get to it. But in this case, where we're talking about sort of an explicit share to a named user, it is a scoped sharing action. Does that answer the question? Question up front. So just to repeat the question, if you have a dashboard, yeah. Right. Okay. So I think that should, Larissa, and Julie, sorry, it was if the dashboard is talking with AS on premises, does the recipient of the share need a Power BI Pro license in that case? Oh, they do. Okay, they do require that. Right. Okay, so yeah, because the data is on premises, then that's there, yeah. So I just want to run through this, and then we can take questions afterwards as well. So there's sharing outside your organization, turn that off as a tenant administrator, and then actually this touches on the question I think we just talked about as well. There is functionality called publish to web. The reason why this is here is, first of all, it's a great feature, my team owns it, but also something to think about in terms of controlling data again, right? What the action of publish to web is doing is whatever report that user is publishing is now available effectively via just a URL. Right? It is anonymous access. In the share case, it is a named user. They have to either sign in or sign up to sign in. In the publish to web, it is anonymous. So something to think about. This can be turned off by the tenant administrator as well. And so just I wanted to make sure we called that out as part of how you think about controlling collaboration, how you think about data security. And then a real quick touch on retrieving data from on-premises and the cloud. So for connecting to data sources, depending on what the data source type is, we might handle things a little bit differently. There is cloud data sources and on-premises data sources. An example or two of cloud data sources: Marketo, SQL Azure Data Warehouse, HD Insights, a variety of those. In this case, the creds, as we've talked about before, are stored in Power BI because we need to know how to connect to that. For on-premises data, like in SQL servers and analysis services, what we use is a technology called the gateway. Actually, there's a personal version and an enterprise version that we run in the cloud. That is how we reach into the on-premises data environment, right? That is the proxy, so to speak, that gives us access to what we need. Again, we need credentials so that we can make that connection. And ultimately, we reach through to the on-prem server. In the case of analysis services, like we talked about, we take that one step further with the effective username, which gives you RLS. How this looks a little bit. So the Power BI Gateway, the personal version. I have a pointer. That doesn't work. Okay, so what we have is up in the cloud is where Power BI lives. That's where your reports and dashboards are, right? That knows what the data sources are for it. It will leverage in the middle piece right there is your personal gateway. You can go and refresh the data as needed. You schedule that. And that's ultimately what reaches to whatever your on-premises environment is, right? Whatever the data sources are on-prem. Anyone in your company can set this up. It's personal, right? I individually own this instance of the gateway. That's how my reports data source connects to the information. At service and scale level, we have an enterprise gateway. This is something that IT in your organization will set up. Therefore, it's set up and managed centrally. Because it's now one instance and it's inside the service, all the info that we need about how to connect and all that is stored in our service, right? It's stored in the gateway. And it offers more functionality. It enables that refresh of data, which the personal did. We also support direct query, for example, right? This is the sort of just-in-time grab information from your on-premises sources. So it's a much higher set of functionality offered through the enterprise gateway. And the other thing is you don't have a dependency on an individual setting up the gateway for the report and such to be correct. So since we're talking about security, we like things being controlled and locked down. This is a really good way to go. We've talked a bit about, but just want to show the diagram for how we connect to the analysis services in an on-premises environment. I mentioned before, a user signs into Power BI with their Azure AD user identity. That user identity has a user principal name. Just to be clear, this sometimes comes up as a point of confusion. The user principal name is not necessarily the email address that your user receives email at. So because this actually matters here, the user principal name is the actual artifact that we emit to the on-premises environment. A lot of companies have it be the same, right? jluck@microsoft.com is my email address. jluck@microsoft.com is my sign-in name, is my user principal name. But for a variety of legacy reasons, some of which I'm responsible for, we actually let people sign in potentially with both. And so that's why it's your AAD user's UPM. That's what's sent on premises. That's what gets mapped against AD. So I want to just point that out because there has been some confusion at times about that. And then once that's on-prem, like we talked about, local AD lookup, you get the AD user, RLS is evaluated, data sent back to the cloud. And so that's just one last thing in there. And that's it for planned content. I know we had questions, so I'll get back to that. I did want to just point out a couple resources that will cover a lot of what we talked about here. The security white paper is something we keep up to date. That's a joint effort with engineering, our architects. We want to put everything that matters in that white paper. We're trying to find out, what are the things that you do want to hear about. So after this, if there's questions, let me know. We'll try to get that in. Deeper dive on SQL analysis services and RLS. So there's documentation on the web about that. Talks about the connector, how things work, the effective username, in a little more detail. And then, of course, there's just all-up Power BI documentation. That's our general documentation site, which talks through any of the above, right? We talked about sharing or content packs, enabling, disabling, self-sign-up. All those things are covered throughout our documentation section. So that would be useful for you as well. With that, that's it, folks, for planned content. I'll definitely take questions. Thank you for your time. Oh, it's my turn. So you're talking about the domain extension basically for, right? This is right up my alley. So on Microsoft.com is just the default domain that we give to any Azure AD tenancy, right? And so in terms of the question you asked, which is, well, what happens if my user got synced, for example, created, user at contoso.microsoft.com, you can switch that value later, right? You can change the UPN value in Azure AD, or once you sync, it'll update that, in the cloud. So as long as the Azure AD user principal name matches your on-premises user principal name, even if you had to change it, all of the RLS stuff will work, because that's what the lookup ends up being. So again, that's why the user principal name attribute is a thing that matters when we talk about effective username between cloud and on-premises. I'll get these guys in there. Yeah. Oh. Yep. Is AAD premium required for MFA? I will, if you find me after, I'll make sure I can follow up with you. I believe the answer is not for just straight up enable MFA for this user. There's conditional access, which says if you're outside of this IP range when you're logging in, don't require advanced configurations. Those do require AAD Premium, EMS, and all that. But I believe just turning on, like you saw here, it does not require AADP. Yeah. We are working on a variety of certifications and things like that. What I can do is get you in touch with our compliance team for a little more detail on what that roadmap looks like. So if you want to just find me right after, I'll grab your email. Yeah. Yes. Right, right. That's a great question. The question there was custom visualizations and how security works. We pop up the one thing that says enable custom visuals. What we're actually doing as we speak is we're enabling a technology called sandboxing, which will encapsulate entirely the code that's being run. We're also wanting to do things like reference the true source as opposed to potentially a malicious source in between to improve that security posture. So in order for something to get into the community visuals at all, we actually do have a process where we do look through and ensure things are, for the most part, okay. We haven't had any, where it's like, okay, well, this pattern, good, bad. But that's what we're doing, so we're improving that by introducing this sandbox. There was a post by Mukash about 3 weeks ago saying, hey, this is coming. It was in the community where he describes that in a little more detail. But that's what that enable is we just want you to know. We're also trying to make that warning more useful. Because right now, it just doesn't show you anything. It doesn't tell you what the visual is. Yeah, or if it needs to do certain things like make cross-network calls or anything, then we say, this app is going to want to do something. So it's more meaningful. What is it exactly that I'm being warned about, right? So Sandbox will, by default, take care of a lot of the concerns. If there is sort of elevated access or something, then it'll call that out. Much like with applications, it asks for consent to do X or Y. So that's the model we'll follow for custom visuals. Sorry, this guy had his hand, and then I'll come back to here. Could you repeat the first part of that?
So right now, if somebody uploads data,
yep.
It's a data set or a report, whatever. We saw the dashboard in the keynote that gives insight to what data sets are out there and what users are using it.
I see.
But will we be able to go in and see what those data sets are and nix them if we need to?
That's interesting. If you hang on, I might grab someone from the back, Larissa or folks, who were talking about monitoring the service as well, understanding that. Because you're asking, it's not enough to know what. You actually may want to go in and explore what the data is, right, from a management and admin. Yeah, if you find Larissa in the back room, she might be able to get you more info on that. Sorry, yeah.
Enterprise Gateway direct connect with on-prem SQL data via ODBC, DSN? Does it have to go through analysis sources?
I can follow up for you on that. I don't actually know myself. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Dashboards, making dashboards available in SharePoint portals or whatnot, right? That is an ask that we've actually gotten in a lot of areas, and we're working on a solution for that right now. So we want to make it so that you can, the simplest case is I'm a user like at Microsoft. I want this one report or dashboard to show up in SharePoint. I want to select it and just have it kind of show up in there. That's something that we're working with the SharePoint team on right now. We're trying to figure out their web part infrastructure. How can we make it fit in as simply as possible? So it is something we've been asked for and we're exploring. Yeah, so if you synchronize your directory from on-premises, then the AD groups are available in Azure AD, right? And then so from that, you saw in a couple different UI pieces, you can share 2 groups, do things like that. Then those groups would show up in the auto-resolve in the same way a user would. So if you're running AD Connect or DirSync from before, those groups make it into Azure AD. Whenever you have an option to share 2, for example, users or groups, they should be available there. And again, that's correct. Now, in the workspace bit, remember how it said create group? That's the one where you can't nest an AD group into a workspace group yet. But in the other ones, when you want to scope your sharing, perhaps, you can't, if a group is an option, AD groups will show up in there. Yeah?
You said whenever you share a dashboard or a contact, everyone that's in the destination can see everything. Is that still true when the row level filtering is done?
Right, so the question was if I share a dashboard and then the data source has RLS enabled, does that change that? In the case where it is an RLS enabled data source behind that, the RLS will take over. So that was the note at the bottom there, which was it says, if you're using something like analysis services, which has RLS. Oh, I'm sorry, right, the new feature that's being, you know what? Let's grab Julie for that. She actually owns the feature. We can double check and see. The answer, I believe, should be it would, because in the same way, right, RLS would override kind of a default behavior, but we can just double check with Julie right after this. I think I'm getting the music cue, so I'll take one more question, then I'll go to the back of the room.
So I've heard agency that uses protected health information.
Okay.
So in lay terms, because I was sent by my IT when
I see. So your question is, there's a data source, you've created reports, a whole bunch of stuff on top of it. One of those reports you publish to the web. Does that path of having published a report which is using that data source introduce kind of a way for a malicious user to get through? In this particular case, I mean, as best as anyone can ever guarantee, the answer is no, right? The way that that's constructed is there isn't a direct path by saying, oh, because I can see this on, healthcare.com website, and then you can't kind of follow that chain all the way back. We have protections in place that don't let you kind of see the whole data set or anything. It's whatever the report is that you've published, that's the limit of what anyone who's viewing it should be able to get to.
Oh, so it's just that piece of information.
It's everything that's needed for that report. Because the report could do a bunch of stuff. Like, we don't know what you've done, but that is kind of the limiting factor. Your interactivity is through the report. You can't bypass the report, so to speak, and go to the tables or whatever is under the hood. Does that help? So I'm going to turn this off, and I'll be at the back of the room as well if there's more questions, though. Thanks, everyone.